Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gilroy Real Estate Market Analysis for February of 2023. This is where we take a few minutes out of the day to take a look at the numbers that we are experiencing right now in Gilroy, looking at the past numbers and hopefully mixing those together and seeing if we can't gaze into the crystal ball and figure out where the market might be going in the coming months. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at Gilroy. As always, we're going to start with the total active listings for February of 2023. We can see that the market has grown by 44.1% from the same time last year. So in February of 2022, we had 34 homes on the market. In February of 2023, that number jumped up to 49. So a pretty substantial jump from the same time last year. Right now, we stand at 1.8 months of inventory for Gilroy. Now, what's interesting about that is if we look just at that number, we would assume we are in a seller's market, but that is not what's happening. And as we get into these later numbers, we'll see how that is the case. But what makes this number interesting, and the reason why I've started calling out months of inventory, is that we are right on a razor's edge here. One small change in the habit of buyers and would instantly kick us into a seller's market with only 1.8 months of inventory on hand. Now, if we take a look at past performance to try and see if we can't figure out where that might lead us in the coming months, we can see that between January and February of last year, we saw a decline. We saw the same thing happening this year. From February to March, we saw an increase, and that's to be expected. That is a seasonal thing that normally tends to happen. And last year, we can see that from about February right on up to July, we had steady increases in overall inventory in Gilroy. My guess is we'll see the same sort of general performance month to month, but without those kinds of, I think we'll see higher numbers. I think we'll tend to see higher number of active listings accumulating compared to the same time last year, with potentially more inventory growth later in the year, assuming that buyers don't jump back into the market and start buying. We could see an uptick in the amount of accumulation of inventory, which could actually push that months of inventory up. But for right now, I would simply say, yes, we are going to see an inventory increase over the next few months, simply because historically that's what we do. But it's going to be the rate of increase that's going to be interesting to watch. And it wouldn't surprise me if we see this rate of increase be a little bit more accelerated than compared to past years. Now, if we go ahead and move on to the next set of data here, which is new listings. Now, this is the number of sellers that decided to join into the market, or homeowners that decided to list their homes for sale. This year, the number is down 23% compared to the same time last year. We had 52 homes added to the market in February of 2022. And in February of 2023, that number dropped to 40. Again, if we look at the trends, we can see we peaked at the usually expected times in March, April, May, and then with a decline really much throughout the rest of the year till December, with an uptick in January, which is, again, if we compare it to the same time last year, in December of 2021, we saw a big jump from December to January. And remember, March is a magic month in terms of how we look at things right now. And the reason is because March is when we first started to see those big interest rate increases that really suppressed buyers and pushed buyers out of the market so that they were no longer really shopping as aggressively as they were versus when interest rates were a lot more beneficial for them. We can see that between January and February, things were relatively flat last year. Between January and February of this year, again, relatively flat. 39 last month, 40 this month, so very reasonable. But then a big jump in March. And again, that is the time when these things tend to happen. March, April, May, these are when folks are looking to put their homes on the market to take advantage of the upcoming summer months, the fact that school is about to end, those types of things. So all very normal. But it'll be interesting to see how many sellers decide to jump in this time. The number has been suppressed. Sellers have had concerns. They haven't been as willing to jump into the market. Confidence in the market is down. My guess is we'll continue to see the same trends, but at lower numbers, just as we did with overall inventory. Now let's go ahead and talk about the total number of homes sold. We have a 37% decline from the same time last year in Gilroy for February of 2023. We had 43 homes sell in February of 2022, 27 homes sold in February of 2023. And if we take a look at the trends, Again, the ramp up that happens, the severe drop from November to January of last year, we saw that not happen quite so much this year. We had a whole lot of homes sell in November and December, not as much in November and December of this year. And then we bottomed out and sort of stayed at 19 homes between December and January, whereas normally there's a decline between December and January. But then once we hit January and February, we saw an increase, and we saw that this year. And as I've discussed before, it's an increase, just not an increase at the scale that we saw last year. So my guess is that when we go into March of this year, we will see an increase or a flat performance between February and March, which is what we saw last year. It'll take April, I think, to sort of see that bump happen in terms of total number of homes sold as we get buyers peeking out on the other side of winter and start looking for deals that they can find on properties that are attractive to them. Now, one other thing to note is, as I like to cover here as well, we are selling fewer homes than we are listing. We net added 13 homes to the inventory in the month of February in Gilroy because we sold 13 fewer homes than we listed. So net additions to the market are what we're seeing. And this is a number we're going to continue to track, because once we see things turn around to the point where we are selling more homes than we are listing because of that low months of inventory number, things are going to quickly get competitive because we'll be overall declining the inventory. And regardless of how many buyers are there, once you bring that inventory down low enough, the stress on buyers to find an effective property for them in the current market is going to be heightened because they just won't have the selection that they've been used to. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at original list price. And as I frequently do, I like to explain what this is. This is the amount that the home was listed for on the day it was listed. This is not necessarily what the list price was at the time that it sold. This doesn't take into account any price reductions or price increases after it was listed. And the reason why I report it this way is because we want to establish what the expectations of sellers are in this market. So in February, sellers were expecting to be able to sell their homes for 24.1% more than they did a year ago on average. Now, this is a big deviation for Gilroy. Gilroy has been my one community where everyone seemed to get it, that they understood that this market had been depressed and gone down. But in a situation like we find ourselves now, that is not necessarily the case. Now, one reality is because of the small sample size of Gilroy, what we can also account for is homes at a higher price range being listed. It just takes one higher priced home to sort of flip this number one direction or another. And the reality is, I think that is, in terms of what I saw when I reviewed the actual numbers, that is really what we're seeing here. This number, if we excluded that one high-end priced home that was listed, this number would be more around 1.24 million, which would calibrate us to Gilroy in general being calibrated to the market. But of course, some folks are going to want to list their higher priced home. The only problem is that is the softest part of the market right now. So those homes in the more luxury or higher priced range are suffering the most in terms of days in market and potentially having to reduce their price if they want to get sold in a timely manner. The way things are happening right now, it's really important for you to price your home correctly. And that's not saying this home isn't priced correctly for what it is. It simply means the number of buyers out there at that price point is far lower than it has been historically. So it could take a whole lot longer. Now, if we want to look for trends, again, a month-to-month trend on this kind of number in a small market like Gilroy is a little bit difficult because one very low or very high-priced home, because we're talking about handfuls of homes, can definitely skew these numbers. So relatively flat, but with some very obvious declines over the past 6 months, sort of stabilizing right around 1.1 to 1.2 million in terms of the average original price. If we want to take a look now at average sales prices, we can see that we had 1,253,000 was the average sales price last year. We're down 2.64%. So not a huge drop. And because that number alone tells us that whatever else is happening in terms of what homes are listed at, once they actually get sold, because this represents that, what the actual sales price was, that we are not way off from last year. So not as much as other communities. So I think that's somewhat comforting. We're at 1.25 right now. We're at 1.22 now. We're at 1.25 last year. And as I mentioned, a 2.64% drop. Interesting to see the uptick. Clearly, folks are willing to spend a little more in Gilroy when they find the right house. But overall, we are seeing average numbers coming down. I mean, we really saw since August of 2022, things have really sort of trended downward in average sales price for Gilroy. And I think one element that's moving this is that luxury home in Gilroy is going to cost you less now than it would have cost you in Morgan Hill or San Jose. So I think buyers at these higher price points who have now had to go a little bit lower but still don't want to lower their expectations for the actual home they purchase have moved south in terms of their search, because the trend I'm seeing in other areas north of Gilroy tends to indicate that that's what's been happening. I've seen more interest in Morgan Hill versus more expensive communities up in the core of Silicon Valley, so that the trend now has been less about lowering your expectations on the house and more about going ahead and embracing that lower price point because of interest rates, but moving to an area where the average price of a more luxury oriented home is lower than where they originally started their search. Okay, next, percent of list price. This represents the buyer's mindset. This is a number that represents what was the offered and accepted price of a home versus what it was listed at the time that it sold. So not compared to the original list price, but compared to the price the buyer had right in front of them when they made their offer. And we can see that it's been a downward trend really since April of 2022. It's down 10.1 percentage points from the same time last year, which is a huge delta. Last year at this time, we were seeing 106.8% of list price at the time of sale, which basically meant on average, sellers were getting 6.8% over their asking price. Right now, we're at 96.7, and that's a low point. That is the lowest point we've seen in over a year. So that represents a 3.3% price reduction just from the list price. So buyers were in Gilroy were feeling empowered enough to come in with offers on homes that were about 3.3% below what the list price was. Last month, we had a little bit of a peak at 99.3. Again, these can sometimes get skewed relatively easily because of the small sample size, but the trend is pretty hard to miss. We are definitely in a downturn in terms of this number, and I think we're going to continue to see this be at this level or lower in the coming months. We may see things pick up a little bit as we get into April, May, June, but for right now, I think these numbers stay lower. Next, let's go ahead and look at the days on market. Gilroy is definitely getting hit hard in terms of how long it's taking homes to sell, but some of these days on market, for instance, this month in February of 2023, the average was 62 days on market, but that was also the result of homes that were selling that were on the market longer because they were not priced correctly. And some of those that had a much larger days on market really kind of skewed this number for us. But the trend, again, not hard to spot. We're definitely seeing 30-day plus, month plus days to get homes sold in Gilroy. We're 107% of where we are last year. We had 30 days to get a home sold in February of 2022, 62 days to get a home sold in February of 2023. And we can see that if we look at the trend last year from February, we had a peak last year in February of 30 days. Again, that was another odd month where a home finally sold that had been on the market for months and months and months, which skewed those numbers up. And if you eliminated that home, that was really more of a 10 to 11 day on market month for Gilroy. But normalizing for those kinds of corner cases where statistically these homes are a little bit more blown out, we can see that there's been a very regular rise in days on market. And I think that continues. I think it particularly continues because we still have an awful lot of homes in the Gilroy market that have been on the market for a very long time. And even if once we hit the time of the year when the market starts to see more buyers, that just simply means we're going to reach deeper into the inventory and start to sell homes that have been on the market for longer. So it wouldn't surprise me if we see this actually sort of unnaturally spike. Now, let's take a look at price reductions. This is a reflection of how many homes in Gilroy have reduced their price. In terms of active homes that reduced their price in February of 2023, we've actually seen a drop from the same time from last month. So January was 34.2, February was 26.7, and this is a number that you will expect to go down as more homes are listed at a reasonable price or at a price appropriate for the market. Other areas are doing this exact same thing. We're seeing the exact same problem in other areas where, particularly in Morgan Hill, where homes are being listed way above. The expectations on sellers are bloated way about here, but the actual market is tending to sell a substantial amount below where those expectations are. But Gilroy, historically, for the past few months, has absolutely been one of those communities that was more in tune with what the market would support. Since we've seen this uptick, I think, in buyer attention in Gilroy as folks have moved south to try to get that same level of home they were hoping for at a slightly lower price. It wouldn't surprise me if we start to see more activity in Gilroy than would normally be expected. And that's the timing on this is great for Gilroy because we're heading into those months when things are going to be a little hotter for the market. So we'll see how those end up panning out. All right. So overall, I think Gilroy is positioned fairly well in terms of what sellers can expect and what buyers are hoping to achieve in purchasing or having moved their searches to Gilroy. As always, the goal is to leave you with more information on the table than I take up in your time, and I absolutely hope we've achieved that. If you'd like to talk to me about reaching your real estate goals, whether it's buying, selling, or investing, feel free to reach out to me at my website, soldbyrobert.com. You can use any of the tools I have there for starting your home search, or you can request a home market analysis or even get an instant market analysis generated right there. As soon as you enter your address, it'll simply spit out what your estimated home value is. Of course, that's not as accurate as a comparable market analysis, but as a ballpark number, it's perhaps a great place to start for you. All right. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I'll talk to you all next time.